What happens when the world crowns you as flawless, but that very perfection turns into your prison? Stella Tennant wasn't just another model, she was aristocracy, fashion royalty, a woman who, at first glance, seemed to have it all. Karl Lagerfeld himself once called her the Coco Chanel of the 90s. With her razor sharp cheekbones, cropped hair, and fearless androgyny, she didn't just walk runways, she redefined what beauty even meant. But here's the thing. While the world saw effortless glamour behind the curtain, the cracks were always there, subtle but unshakable. From a sheep farm in Scotland to the dazzling campaigns of Chanel, Stella lived her life like she was rewriting every rule. And yet, the question that still haunts the fashion world is this: how did someone born with every possible advantage become one of its most heartbreaking tragedies? Was she really fashion's golden girl, or was she hiding its darkest secret? To find out, we have to start at the very beginning, not in Paris or Milan, but on a sheep farm. Now, this wasn't just any farm. The Tennant estate sprawled across 1,500 acres of rolling Scottish hills, land soaked in history where aristocracy blended with agriculture. This was the territory of the Cavendish family, an English dynasty with roots so deep they practically shaped the country. Stella's mother, Lady Emma Cavendish, was the daughter of the Duke of Devonshire. She grew up in Chatsworth House, one of England's most breathtaking stately homes. Yes, the kind of place that looks like a palace out of a movie. Her father, Tobias Tennant, was a farmer, yes, but one with an artist's heart and a rebellious streak that would run deep through Stella's veins. This was old money, real money, the kind where your life path is practically scripted before you can walk, finishing school, charity boards, the right marriage, polite mentions and tatler, a life of velvet ropes and rigid expectations. But Stella, from the start, she wanted none of it. Born in 1970, she came into the world wired differently. While other girls of her class were learning piano scales and practicing perfect posture, Stella was, well, let's just say, rewriting the rule book. At 16, she grabbed a pair of scissors and shaved off her hair. She pierced her own nose with a safety pin. And just like that, the look that would one day shake the fashion world was born. Her parents were horrified. Their friends, scandalized. But Stella, she felt free, because this wasn't just about rebellion. This was about rejecting the very definition of beauty her world had tried to force on her. She had grown up surrounded by oil portraits of powdered ancestors and the suffocating traditions of high society. She knew exactly what she was supposed to look like, and she was determined to be the opposite. Her family hoped it was just a phase. Surely university would tame her. Surely she'd grow out of it. But when Stella enrolled at Winchester School of Art to study sculpture, she didn't soften her edges. She doubled down. She pierced her eyebrow. She raided thrift shops for old men's jackets and oversized trousers. She looked less like a future supermodel and more like someone who had just stumbled out of a punk club, still smelling of rebellion, and into an art lecture hall. And that's the thing, Stella wasn't chasing beauty. She wasn't chasing anything the fashion world cared about. While the industry was worshipping glossy hair and perfect poses, Stella was knee-deep in clay, sculpting strange shapes, dreaming of galleries, not glossy magazines. She talked about opening her own studio one day, about creating art that didn't decorate rooms but challenged the way people saw the world. The last thing on her mind was a runway, but fate, as it often does, had other plans. Because while Stella was trying to disappear into her art, the fashion world was watching. And not just watching, it was hungry. It was the early 90s. The supermodel era was still dazzling the world. Naomi Campbell, Linda Evangelista, Claudia Schiffer, faces that seemed almost unreal. But behind the scenes, editors and photographers were starting to get restless. The world had overdosed on perfection. What they craved now wasn't another goddess in couture. They wanted something real, raw, unforgettable. And then came 19. The year everything changed. Stephen Meisel, the photographer who could transform an unknown face into a household name, was shooting for British Vogue. To put it bluntly, Meisel didn't just take photos, he created icons. Naomi Campbell became wildfire through his lens. Linda Evangelista, immortal. And when Stephen Meisel called, nobody, absolutely nobody, said no. This time the concept was called Anglo-Saxon Attitudes, a spread celebrating British beauty. But Meisel wasn't interested in polished pageantry. He wanted something different, something that made you freeze mid-page and ask, who is that? That's when he heard about her. an aristocratic art student with a buzz cut, piercings, and the kind of attitude that screamed anti-model. She'd never been in front of a camera, never owned a portfolio, never cared about the industry at all. And that's exactly what made her irresistible. Stella Tennant walked into that London studio wearing ripped jeans and a faded band tee, surrounded by models who looked like they'd stepped straight out of a catalog. Perfect makeup, perfect posture, smiles rehearsed in mirrors for years. And then there was Stella, slouching, awkward, probably wondering why she even agreed to show up. But the second she walked through the door, Meisel froze. She doesn't look like anyone else. He whispered to his assistant, those cheekbones sharp as glass, that buzz cut stripping away everything familiar about femininity, and that aura, somehow masculine and feminine, soft and dangerous, vulnerable and defiant, all at once. She wasn't just in the room. She owned it without even trying. At first, the photo shoot was clumsy. Stella didn't know how to pose, how to find her light, how to hold her angles like the other models did. But Meisel didn't care about perfect technique. What he saw in Stella was something the others couldn't fake: authenticity. Stop trying, he told her. Just be, and in that moment, it clicked. The lens loved her. The photos weren't just good, they were electric. Stella wasn't just posing. She was inhabiting. Every frame looked like a standoff between her and the camera, as if she were daring it to capture something real. Her buzz cut, it turned Chanel's pearls and silks into a rebellion. Her sharp, angular features, they made soft fabrics look dangerous, almost weaponized. This wasn't modeling. This was art colliding with attitude. And the result? Explosive. Within weeks, those Meisel photos were everywhere. Editors were raving. Stylists were buzzing. Fashion's power players wanted her. Except Stella didn't even have an agent. No headshots, no portfolio. Just raw magnetism that the industry couldn't look away from. The phone calls poured in. Casting directors, creative directors, photographers, bored of perfect faces, they all wanted her. But then came the call that would change her life forever. From Paris, from the most powerful man in fashion, Karl Lagerfeld. He'd seen the Meisel shots, and he wasn't just intrigued. He was obsessed. Lagerfeld wasn't looking at Stella Tennant as just another model. He saw her as a revolution in the making. His assistant's words were blunt, almost surreal. Mario Lagerfeld would like to meet with Miss Tennant, tomorrow, in Paris. Any model on earth would have dropped everything. Stella, she almost said no. But Karl wasn't just another designer. He was the Kaiser of fashion, the man who resurrected Chanel from the grave and turned it into a billion-dollar empire. When Karl called, you didn't think, you went. The meeting took place at Chanel's legendary atelier on Rue Cambon. Stella walked in, buzz cut gleaming under the lights. Across from her sat Karl in his black suit, white ponytail, and dark sunglasses, studying her like an architect staring at blueprints. And in that silence, one thing became clear. He'd found what he'd been hunting for. Coco Chanel had once liberated women from corsets, given them trousers, and redefined elegance. But Karl needed a new rebel, a face for the 90s, and Stella, with her aristocratic poise mixed with punk defiance, was it. She wasn't traditional beauty. She was something more dangerous. She was power. Then came the first Chanel campaign, shot by Lagerfeld himself. Stella in the classic tweed suit, but instead of soft sophistication, it looked like armor. Her buzz cut shone like steel, her stare sharp enough to cut glass. The industry gasped. Fashion had never seen anything like it. Almost overnight, salons were swarmed by women demanding the Stella cut. Androgyny became aspirational. The curvy bombshell ideal of Cindy Crawford and Pamela Anderson gave way to something sharper, more cerebral, more dangerous. Stella wasn't just selling products. She was rewriting the script of femininity. At Versace, she didn't just walk the runway. She stormed it like a warrior queen. At Alexander McQueen, she became living art. At Calvin Klein, she turned minimalism into rebellion. Designers fought for her, but none could fully capture her essence. She was a paradox wrapped in tweed and leather, aristocratic, yet somehow accessible, avant-garde, yet effortlessly elegant, masculine and feminine at once. She could make a couture gown look like a suit of armor, or make ripped jeans look like couture. By 1996, Stella Tennant was everywhere. Magazine covers, ad campaigns, front rows. The girl who once pierced her own nose with a safety pin was now the face of luxury itself. Fashion icon Isabella Blow said it best. Her beauty was in her eyes. She was absolutely wild, like a bird you could never cage, a tomboy who had never worn a dress. But here's what no one realized at the time. Stella wasn't playing fashion's game. She was playing her own, and her rules about beauty, success, and perfection were far more fragile than anyone could see. The cracks were already there, faint but spreading. In an interview, Stella once admitted, "When I was working full-on for the first 5 years, I would do 75 shows a season. I was exhausted. That effortless look, it was anything but effortless. Behind every 'I woke up like this' photo was an army of stylists, makeup artists, and lighting crews, all working to create the illusion that Stella was simply born extraordinary." The irony was brutal. She had become famous for being natural, but now being natural required a full production team. By the late 90s, Stella was trapped inside the very image that had made her iconic. She confessed, "I didn't really know if I wanted to open the door and see what was inside. I thought it was a big shallow world, and I wasn't sure I liked the look of it." The industry had boxed her an aristocratic rebel. Every ad, every runway, every public appearance had to reinforce that brand. But Stella wasn't rebelling anymore. She was performing rebellion, and the cost was mounting. Then, in 1999, she married French photographer David Lasnet. Finally, someone who understood the pressure, someone who saw beyond the image. Together, they built what she had always secretly longed for: a family, stability, a quiet life outside of the cameras. 4 children soon followed: Marcel, Cecily, Jasmine, and Iris. For a moment, it seemed like Stella had escaped. She traded catwalks for school runs, flashbulbs for bedtime stories. But the fashion world doesn't release its icons so easily. Even as she stepped back, the offers kept coming. The campaigns, the shows, the money, too good to refuse, too rare to ignore. And slowly, the woman who had once taught the world to celebrate difference began to struggle with her own reflection. Here's the truth about fashion no one likes to say out loud: it's an industry built on youth, and it demands that youth last forever. Stella was aging, naturally, gracefully, but visibly. The same cheekbones that made her were still there, but now accompanied by lines etched by a life well lived. In any other world, those lines would have been called character. In fashion, they were called expiration. The campaigns didn't stop, but they shifted. She was no longer the rebel redefining beauty. She was cast as the timeless elder, the elegant icon. And Stella could read between the lines. The industry wasn't celebrating her, it was slowly managing her out. Then came the blow she couldn't hide behind a photo shoot: the divorce. After 21 years of marriage, Stella and David separated in 2020. The official statement was polite, diplomatic: mutual decision, remain friends, focus on the children. But to those close to her, it was another foundation crumbling beneath her feet. She was 50, her children were nearly grown, her marriage was over, and the industry that had once idolized her was now treating her like she was disposable. The woman who had convinced the world that beauty lived in difference was struggling to see her own worth. And then came 2020, the year everything stopped, her divorce finalized, her children thriving. On paper, it looked like Stella's chance for reinvention, finally free of fashion's grip, free of expectation, free to be whoever she wanted to be. But freedom can be more terrifying than fame. Who was Stella Tennant when she wasn't being Stella Tennant? The pandemic shut down the fashion world, leaving her back on her family's estate in Scotland, surrounded by the same rolling hills where she'd once shaved her head as a rebellious teenager. Only now there was no rebellion left, just exhaustion. The silence was deafening. After decades of noise, runways, cameras, endless teams buzzing around her, the stillness felt less like peace and more like isolation. Friends noticed the change. The warrior who once commanded runways now looked fragile. The aristocratic reserve that had once felt like strength now felt like a wall. Her family later admitted, gently, heartbreakingly, that Stella had been unwell for some time. She felt unable to go on, despite being deeply loved. On December 22nd, 2020, just 5 days after her 50th birthday, the call came. Stella Tennant had been found dead at her home in Scotland. The official ruling was suicide. But the real cause,
that was more complicated. It was decades of pressure, decades of being reduced to an image, decades of trying to live inside an identity that had been written for her, not by her. The fashion world was stunned. Here was a woman who had everything, the bloodline, the career, the family. But maybe that was the point, because what Stella Tennant taught us in life and in death is that perfection isn't freedom. Sometimes perfection is the heaviest prison of all. In the end, Stella Tennant had everything, except the one thing that mattered most, the freedom to be imperfect. When the news of her death broke, the tributes poured in. Designers who had draped her in couture, photographers who had immortalized her face, models who had looked up to her as proof that you didn't have to fit the mold to belong on the runway. But the most powerful tributes didn't come from fashion royalty. They came from everyday people, teenagers who saw themselves in her sharp cheekbones and defiant buzz cut. Women who learned, from Stella, that difference wasn't something to hide, it was something to wield. Even Karl Lagerfeld, who passed just a year before her, had once said, "Stella will outlive us all." And in a way he was right, because her influence isn't measured in campaigns or magazine covers. It's measured in the way she rewired how we think about beauty, authenticity, and the courage it takes to stand apart. But her death forced the fashion industry to stare into a mirror it rarely dares to face. The very machine that celebrates individuality so loudly often suffocates the individuals at its center. The pressure to maintain an image, to always look effortless, to never age, to never falter. It's not liberation, it's a slow, crushing suffocation. And yet Stella Tennant's legacy refuses to be defined by tragedy, because she fashioned forever. She proved that beauty can look like rebellion, that strength can live in vulnerability, that the most powerful thing you can be is yourself. Every time someone dares to shave their head, wear what feels true, or walk into a room unapologetically themselves, Stella's spirit is there. Every time someone rejects the world's script and writes their own, her story continues. She was an aristocrat, an icon, a rebel, but most importantly, she was human. A reminder that behind every perfect image is a person who deserves to be accepted and loved, not for the role they play, but for who they are. The cameras may have stopped flashing, the runways may be silent, but the stories Stella Tennant told with her life, about courage, authenticity, and the high cost of perfection, that story will never end.